A single night in a border village. The hour history forgot. The hook arrives quietly, the way most nights do when nothing important is scheduled to happen. There is no announcement, no drumbeat, no sentence that begins with destiny. This is not the kind of night that historians line up to inherit. It is a night that slips into place because there was an empty space waiting for it. Somewhere far from capitals and ink and commemorative stone, a border village settles into darkness. Not because darkness is meaningful, but because the sun has finished its part. Late night history prefers these openings. They require no permission. They do not pretend to matter. And because of that, they often tell the truth more clearly than grand events ever manage to. The village has no name that survived long enough to become useful. It sits where borders do what borders usually do, not drawing lines but creating habits. People here live with uncertainty, the way others live with weather. It is not dramatic. It is not poetic. It is simply present. The houses do not face outward in pride. They turn inward slightly, as if conserving energy. Wood and earth do most of the work. Stone appears only when necessary. Nothing here is designed to impress a future audience. Everything is built for endurance, which is a very different ambition. Night arrives without ceremony. No one marks the moment when light gives up. It is noticed only because tasks stop making sense. Tools are put down not in relief but in routine. The sound of movement fades gradually, like a conversation that no one bothered to end properly. There is no curfew enforced by authority. There is only fatigue, which is far more effective. In places like this, darkness does not signal danger so much as it signals limitation. You can do less. You see less, and that is accepted without complaint. Calling this place a border village is generous. Borders here are not clean ideas. They are felt rather than seen. A sense that somewhere nearby, life operates under slightly different assumptions. A reminder that safety is provisional. No one needs to explain this out loud. It has been absorbed over generations. Children learn it before they learn dates. Adults forget when they first noticed it. The border is not something you guard with pride. It is something you live beside carefully. Inside the houses, the night changes shape. Firelight reduces the world to what is necessary. Faces soften, objects lose their ambition. Everything becomes quieter not out of respect, but out of practicality. Voices drop because shouting wastes strength. Movement slows because tomorrow will demand the same body again. This is not rest in the modern sense. It is preparation disguised as stillness. There is a certain irony in how invisible nights like this become. Nothing happens, which is precisely why everything continues. No raid arrives. No messenger interrupts sleep. No moment rises high enough to deserve a sentence in a chronicle. And so this night will never be cited. It will never be summarized. It will never be misunderstood by later generations because it will never be remembered at all. History has a bias toward disruption. Stability rarely earns attention. If someone were to ask where this village is, the most honest answer would be that it exists just far enough away to avoid relevance. Not important enough to defend aggressively, not valuable enough to claim loudly. Its survival depends on being overlooked. That is not strategy. It is circumstance refined into instinct. As the hours deepen, the village does not grow tense, it grows dull. The kind of dullness that comes from repetition. People here know that fear is expensive. It consumes energy and offers little return. Instead, they cultivate a quieter awareness. Ears register sound without chasing it. Bodies shift without fully waking. This is not vigilance, it is adaptation. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you are welcome to stay with us. Nothing here is urgent. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and allows these long hours to continue unfolding without interruption. Now rest. This night does not need witnesses. It only needs to pass. Somewhere outside, the land holds its shape. Fields do not care whether they are defended. Paths remember footsteps even when no one walks them. The village exists in this mutual indifference. It is not hostile. It is not kind. It simply is. And in that simplicity, there is a strange calm. The absence of meaning removes the pressure to perform. Late night history lingers here because it understands something most daytime narratives forget. The majority of human experience unfolded in conditions like this: quiet, repetitive, slightly uncomfortable, no applause, no conclusion, just continuity. When historians later search for causes and consequences, they often skip these hours entirely. They jump from event to event, mistaking motion for importance. But nothing dramatic is required to shape a life. Nights like this taught people how much sleep they could afford, how quickly they could wake, how long they could endure uncertainty without naming it. Those lessons did not need articulation. They settled into muscle and habit. As the night continues, it does not grow heavier. It grows familiar. Darkness becomes less a presence and more a background. The village breathes slowly. If this night were removed, nothing obvious would collapse. And yet it supports everything that follows. Tomorrow will arrive not because of hope, but because nothing interrupted it. This is the kind of night history rarely thanks. It asks for no recognition. It leaves no trace. And that may be its most honest contribution. A border that never slept, fatigue as geography. The hook arrives not with tension, but with a long exhale. This is not the kind of place that startles easily. The border has been here too long for that. Long enough to stop feeling like a line and start behaving like a habit. Long enough that no one remembers when it first became tiring. Late night history prefers moments like this. Not the clash, not the announcement. Just the slow realization that living beside uncertainty eventually turns uncertainty into furniture. Something you stop noticing unless it is moved. In this village, the border is not treated as a battlefield. That would require energy. Instead, it is treated like weather. Something that exists. Something that may worsen without warning. Something that cannot be argued with and therefore should not be discussed too loudly. People do not wake each morning asking whether the border will matter today. They wake knowing it always does, in small ways. It shapes where houses are built, how paths bend, how quickly doors close once the light fades. It is not dramatic. It is persistent. Fatigue. Here is not a failure of morale. It is a survival technique refined over generations. People learn that constant alertness is unsustainable. Panic burns calories and provides no shelter. Instead, they develop a low, steady awareness. A posture rather than a reaction. Shoulders slightly forward. Ears always half listening. This is not fear. It is adjustment. The village itself reflects this state of mind. Buildings do not stretch upward or outward. Expansion suggests optimism. Optimism invites disappointment. So space is arranged inward. Structures cluster close as if warmth could be shared simply by proximity. There is little decoration, not because people dislike beauty, but because beauty requires explanation. This place values things that explain themselves: walls that hold, roofs that last, floors that do not collapse under repeated use. Endurance becomes the aesthetic. No one here expects tomorrow to feel different from today. That expectation has been gently removed by experience. The absence of anticipation produces a certain calm. When nothing is promised, nothing can be taken away. People plan in short increments: a day, a task, a season at most. Long-term visions are a luxury better suited to safer ground. There is a quiet irony in how history treats places like this. They appear only when something goes wrong: a raid, a skirmish, a brief flare of relevance before slipping back into obscurity. When nothing happens, they disappear from the record entirely. Yet nothing happening is precisely how they survive. Stability does not shout. It whispers and is therefore overlooked. If someone from far away were to arrive and ask what makes this place important, the answer would be unsatisfying. It works. It continues. It does not collapse often enough to attract concern. It does not thrive enough to provoke envy. It exists in a narrow band of tolerable difficulty. That is its entire achievement. The border itself is never clearly visible. There are no markers grand enough to inspire confidence. Instead, there are subtle signals: a shift in dialect, a change in tools, a path that narrows without explanation. Everyone knows roughly where it lies, and no one trusts that knowledge completely. Maps would offer false comfort. Memory works better. People here do not tell heroic stories about the border. Heroism implies choice. Most residents were born into proximity. They did not volunteer for tension. They inherited it. Their stories are practical: what to listen for, when to move livestock, which nights feel heavier than others. These lessons are passed quietly, without ceremony. The constant state of readiness seeps into daily life. Movements are economical. Words are chosen carefully, not out of politeness but conservation. Energy saved during the day may be needed at night. Even laughter is restrained, not absent, just measured. Joy exists, but it does not announce itself loudly. Excess attracts attention, and attention is unpredictable. Living spaces reinforce this rhythm. Rooms serve multiple purposes. Nothing is allowed to sit idle without justification. Furniture is sparse not because of poverty, but because clutter slows movement. Every object must earn its place by being useful more than once. Comfort is tolerated as long as it does not interfere with function. The fatigue of border life does not express itself as despair. That would require reflection. Instead, it settles as neutrality. People do not expect justice or reward. They expect continuity. This expectation is rarely disappointed. Days pass. Nights arrive. The border remains where it was yesterday. That reliability is its own form of reassurance. Late-night history lingers here because this is where large narratives lose their confidence. Empires argue over lines, while villages adapt to gradients. Policies change, rulers come and go. The border village adjusts slightly and continues. Its loyalty is not ideological. It is practical. Whoever interferes least is tolerated most. There is also a quiet humor embedded in this endurance. Not jokes exactly, more an awareness of how unimpressive survival can look from the outside. No banners, no songs, Just people waking up again? If anyone here were declared heroic, they would likely find it confusing. Heroism suggests an ending. This place specializes in not ending. As night settles, the fatigue becomes more noticeable, but also more manageable. Darkness removes the illusion of control, and that honesty is oddly comforting. The village does not resist night, it accommodates it. Doors close, sounds soften, awareness remains but does not sharpen. This is not vigilance, it is coexistence. The border at night feels less like a threat and more like a reminder that certainty was never promised, that security is negotiated daily through small, consistent actions, through habits repeated until they no longer feel like effort. This is why such places rarely inspire admiration. They are too steady, too unremarkable. They do not offer clear lessons. They simply demonstrate that living with uncertainty does not require drama. It requires patience and an acceptance that fatigue is not a flaw, but a byproduct of staying alive long enough to notice patterns. When historians later describe borderlands, they often emphasize conflict. It makes for cleaner stories. But the truth is less energetic. The border is mostly boring. And that boredom is doing important work. It keeps people alive. It keeps communities intact. It absorbs pressure without cracking. The village will not remember this particular day or night. There is no reason to. Tomorrow will resemble it closely, and the day after that. This repetition is not stagnation. It is maintenance. A slow, ongoing agreement between people and place that neither will demand too much from the other. Late-night history does not ask this village to explain itself. It only observes the quiet competence of a life organized around endurance rather than ambition. A border not as a line of fire, but as a long-drawn breath, held just comfortably enough to continue when light withdraws. Evening in a border village. The hook arrives quietly, not because it is shy, but because nothing here benefits from being loud. This is the hour when light stops arguing for itself. It does not collapse or fade dramatically. It simply leaves the work unfinished and expects others to understand. Late-night history favors this moment because it refuses to perform. No bells mark it. No voice announces significance. The village does not pause to acknowledge the transition. It adjusts. And that adjustment tells more about survival than any speech ever could. When the sun lowers enough to stop being useful, labor loosens its grip. Tools are set down without ceremony, not in triumph, not in relief, just because the eyes have decided they are done negotiating with distance. This is not a romantic dusk. It is practical. The light did its job, and now it is no longer cost-effective. People here do not chase the last glow across the fields. That would imply optimism. Optimism is heavy. It requires maintenance. Fire appears next, not as comfort, but as infrastructure. Flames are coaxed carefully, fed only what is necessary. No one stares into them searching for meaning. Fire is a tool. It reveals enough of the room to prevent accidents and nothing more. It keeps hands functional and walls visible. That is sufficient. Warmth is a byproduct, not a goal. The houses themselves seem prepared for this hour. They are low and inward-looking. Roofs slope without ambition. Walls are thick, not for privacy, but for patience. These buildings do not expect to be admired. They expect to last. Comfort is secondary to resistance. Drafts are tolerated if the structure holds. Space is compressed because large rooms waste heat and invite wandering thoughts. As light withdraws, sound follows. Not because silence is respected, but because speaking costs energy. Voices drop, movement slows. Even animals seem to understand the exchange. Everything here cooperates with the idea that night should require less movement, less explanation, less ambition. Inside the village, evening has a weight that daytime does not. It settles gently but firmly. People do not sit to reflect. Reflection implies surplus time. Instead, they sit because standing no longer serves a purpose. Bodies assume positions they have practiced many times. Familiar angles, familiar stiffness. No one expects comfort to improve with age. They expect to adapt. There's a subtle discipline in how people occupy space now. Pathways clear themselves naturally. Objects return to predictable places. This is not order imposed by authority. It is order grown from repetition. Misplaced items cost time later. Time at night is expensive. Everyone knows this without saying it. The village does not brace for danger. That would require imagination. Instead, it prepares for inconvenience. The distinction matters. Doors are closed not in fear but in habit. Open doors invite drafts and animals and complications. Closed doors invite sleep. Sleep is valuable, even when it arrives unevenly. Light inside the houses is managed carefully. Shadows are allowed to exist. Corners remain dark. No one attempts to illuminate everything. Complete visibility is unnecessary and tiring. Partial knowledge is enough. People trust their memory of the room. They do not need to see what has not moved all day. This hour teaches restraint. Children learn it early. They are not instructed. They observe. Loud behavior receives tired looks rather than punishment. Energy is preserved through quiet correction. The lesson is simple. Night is not the time to test limits. There is a quiet humor in how seriously this village takes the act of not doing much. Outsiders might mistake it for dullness. That would be inaccurate. It is efficiency. There is pride in ending the day with something left in reserve. Excess enthusiasm belongs to places that can afford it. As darkness settles more completely, the village does not transform. It narrows. Possibilities reduce themselves. Choices simplify. This is not deprivation. It is clarity. Daytime offered options. Night offers maintenance. Both are necessary. Neither is celebrated. Late night history lingers here because this hour exposes the mechanics of survival without decoration. There are no speeches, no rituals worth naming, just people adjusting their behavior in response to conditions that repeat often enough to be trusted. The light withdrew. The village responded. That is the entire story. Nothing important happens in this hour, and because of that, everything continues. After light leaves, the night that waits without comment. The transition is barely noticeable. Evening did not end so much as it lost momentum. When light withdrew earlier, it left behind a village already prepared for what comes next. Night does not arrive here like a visitor. It settles like dust, slowly, evenly, without asking whether anyone is watching. Late night history finds this moment useful because it reveals a truth that daylight often hides. Most nights were not dramatic, they were operational. Once darkness becomes complete, the village does not change its behavior. It confirms it. Everything that was already slowing now simply stops negotiating. Doors are closed. Fires are reduced. Movement becomes minimal, not because people are afraid, but because there is no advantage in continuing. Night is not a break. It is a holding pattern. The air itself feels different once nothing moves. Sound travels farther but carries less meaning. A step, a cough, the shift of weight on a wooden floor. These noises are not alarming. They are familiar. They belong to the category of things that happen when people are still alive and still waiting. Silence here is not absence. It is agreement. Objects seem comfortable with being ignored. Tools remain where they were left. Benches do not expect company. Walls absorb shadows without comment. The village has learned that constant attention is unnecessary. Nothing here requires reassurance. Stability has lowered expectations across the board. Inside the houses, people rest in ways that do not resemble modern rest. Bodies lie down because gravity eventually wins. Sleep arrives unevenly and without promise. Waking is expected. No one is surprised by it. This is not insomnia. It is realism. Night is not designed to restore completely. It is designed to pass. Waiting becomes the primary activity. Not waiting for an event, waiting for time to move far enough forward to be useful again. This kind of waiting is quiet. It does not lean forward. It does not imagine outcomes. It simply holds position. Late night history respects this because it understands how much of human life existed in this state, suspended between effort and effort. There is a subtle irony in how calm this feels. The village exists near uncertainty, yet behaves as though uncertainty is old news. Panic would imply novelty. Here, nothing feels new enough to justify it. The border remains where it was. Tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to avoid surprise. This expectation is oddly comforting. Night does not demand attention. It does not offer insight. It does not reveal hidden truths. It simply occupies space and time until it no longer needs to. If night had an opinion, it would probably keep it to itself. Opinions require energy and night prefers efficiency. Children sleep lightly, adults do not sleep deeply. This is not dysfunction. It is calibration. Bodies here are trained to remain available, not alert. Available, a small but important distinction. Alertness consumes resources. Availability preserves them. The village feels almost paused, not frozen, paused, as if someone placed a finger on the edge of time without pressing hard enough to stop it completely. Breath continues. Fires flicker. The night advances at its own pace. Late night history stays with this hour because it resists storytelling. There is nothing to summarize, nothing resolves, nothing escalates. This is not a failure of narrative. It is the default state. History often pretends otherwise because stillness is difficult to frame. But stillness is where most lives unfolded. The waiting does not feel long to the people inside it. Length is a concept that requires contrast. Without change, there is nothing to measure against. The night feels normal because it always has. Even discomfort becomes unremarkable when repeated enough times. Somewhere a person turns over and resettles. Somewhere a fire shifts and settles again. These are not events, they are confirmations. The village remains intact. The night remains unopposed. Eventually this waiting will loosen its grip. Not because it is defeated, but because it has completed its function. Until then, nothing demands attention. And that is precisely the point. This night does not ask to be remembered. It only asks to be endured. Those who were never meant to be remembered. Adult lives at the border. The hook settles in slowly, the way recognition often does when no one is looking for it. These are not people history waits for. They do not arrive with names that demand repetition. They do not pause at thresholds hoping to be noticed. They simply exist in a place where existence itself requires effort. Late night history has a habit of drifting toward figures like this, not because they are dramatic, but because they are common. And what is common tends to be quietly erased once it has finished doing its work. If memory has a budget, these lives were never approved for funding. The adults of the border village do not think of themselves as resilient. Resilience suggests choice and pride. What they practice instead is endurance that developed without permission. It arrived gradually and stayed. Their lives are shaped less by decisions than by accumulated reflexes. Stand this way. Listen for that sound. Rest when possible. Move when necessary. None of this feels remarkable to them. It feels normal in the way gravity feels normal once you stop expecting to float. No one here expects improvement. That expectation would require optimism, and optimism is expensive. Improvement implies comparison, and comparison implies disappointment. These adults live with a narrower goal that is proven more reliable. Maintain what works, avoid what costs too much, accept what cannot be changed without inviting collapse. This is not pessimism. It is accounting. Patience here is not admired. It is unavoidable. People wait not because waiting is virtuous, but because rushing offers no advantage. Fields still take time. Bodies still tire. Borders still exist, regardless of enthusiasm. The adults have learned that impatience does not shorten distance. It only exhausts the person attempting it. Daily life becomes an exercise in tolerable strain, not comfort. Comfort is unpredictable. Tolerable strain is dependable. Muscles know how much they can carry. Minds know how much uncertainty they can hold without reacting. This calibration is constant and mostly unconscious. Years of repetition have trained it into the body. No speeches were needed. Conversations among adults rarely drift toward aspiration. That would require imagining a different future. Instead, talk stays close to the surface. Weather, tools, repairs, minor inconveniences that can be solved without discussion. Silence is common and not considered awkward. Silence conserves energy and avoids misinterpretation. Words are used when they accomplish something specific. These adults do not frame their lives as sacrifices. Sacrifice implies an audience. There is none here. They do what is required because not doing it would produce immediate consequences. The simplicity of this logic removes drama from the equation. There is nothing noble about keeping a roof intact. There is only relief when it does not fail. Memory functions differently in this environment. People remember what is useful. Paths, faces, patterns. They do not remember milestones unless those milestones altered routine significantly. Birthdays do not matter. Anniversaries fade. What remains are instructions disguised as recollections. This happened before. Do this next time. That is the full archive. Late night history notices how rarely these adults speak about themselves. Identity is secondary to function. You are known by what you handle well and what you avoid poorly. Reputation is local and practical. It does not travel. There is no incentive for it to do so. There is a quiet humor in how unimpressed these adults are by survival itself. They do not celebrate it. Survival is expected. If anything fails, it is considered inconvenient rather than tragic. Emotional excess would interfere with tomorrow, and tomorrow is already demanding enough. Fatigue is constant, but not discussed. Complaining would require comparison to an imagined alternative. There is no evidence that such an alternative exists, so fatigue becomes another background condition like cold or uneven ground. Managed, not challenged. The patience practiced here is not gentle, it is heavy. It presses downward rather than stretching outward. It teaches people how long they can remain still without feeling trapped, how long they can endure repetition without resentment. These are not lessons anyone volunteers to learn. They are absorbed slowly through exposure. When something does change, it is met with caution rather than excitement. Change threatens calibration. Adults respond by narrowing focus until the new condition becomes familiar. Only then do they relax. Adaptation is allowed. Anticipation is not. These lives leave little behind. No records, no artifacts worth preserving. That absence often leads historians to assume insignificance. Late-night history disagrees. These unnamed adults formed the texture against which larger events briefly appeared. Their steadiness absorbed shocks. Their routines prevented chaos from spreading. Their lack of ambition kept systems from breaking under expectation. If one of these adults were suddenly remembered, it would feel inappropriate. Memory would add weight to a life already carrying enough. Being forgotten is not an insult here. It is a form of mercy. As night deepens in the village, these adults rest without ceremony. Sleep comes and goes. Waking is expected. Nothing about this process feels symbolic. It is mechanical and therefore reliable. Bodies recover just enough to continue. These are the people history relies on, while pretending not to see them. Their patience was never voluntary, but it was effective. And when they are gone, nothing dramatic marks their absence. The village continues because that was always the point. They were never meant to be remembered. And yet everything that followed depended on them anyway. Learning silence. Early. Children at the edge of the border. The hook does not arrive with innocence. It arrives with observation. Children in this village do not wake believing the world will explain itself to them. They wake knowing it probably will not. That lesson settles early and stays. Late-night history pays attention here because this is where expectation quietly disappears. Childhood is often imagined as a protected space. Here it is simply a smaller version of the same space adults occupy. No curtain is drawn. No separate room exists where reality waits, politely outside. The border does not lower its voice for children. It never learned how. Children grow up surrounded by facts that do not invite discussion. Cold exists. Hunger appears occasionally. Fatigue is constant. None of these require explanation because they repeat often enough to be understood through experience. Curiosity still exists, of course. It would be difficult to remove entirely. But curiosity is treated carefully, not encouraged, not punished, simply redirected toward things that will not disrupt the rhythm of the day. Silence becomes one of the first skills learned. Not the silence of obedience, but the silence of efficiency. Speaking costs energy. Questions create delays. Delays invite irritation. Children notice this quickly. They learn which sounds receive acknowledgement and which pass unnoticed. This learning is not formal. It is absorbed through pattern. Loud curiosity meets tired faces. Quiet observation meets acceptance. Adults do not tell children to be quiet because telling requires effort. Instead, they continue what they are doing. The child adjusts. Adaptation happens faster when feedback is consistent. In this way, silence becomes less a rule and more a shared understanding. Night reinforces it. Darkness simplifies behavior. There is less to see, less to do, less to ask. Children are not shielded from work. They are given small tasks not to teach responsibility, but to remove inefficiency. Idle children require attention. Attention is a limited resource. So children are folded into routine early. Carry this, watch that, stay here. The instructions are brief because brevity saves time. Over time, children learn to anticipate what will be asked before it is spoken. This anticipation is valued more than enthusiasm. There is a quiet irony in how capable these children become without ever being told they are capable. Praise is rare, not because adults are unkind, but because praise invites repetition. Repetition wastes time. Tasks are acknowledged by their completion. Nothing more is needed. Curiosity does not vanish. It becomes internal. Children still notice patterns. They simply stop announcing them. Questions are held rather than released. Answers arrive slowly through observation. This produces a particular kind of intelligence, less verbal, more situational. Children know when to move aside, when to wait, when to help without being asked. These skills are rarely recorded but often essential. Play exists, but it is quiet and opportunistic. Moments stolen between obligations. Games do not require equipment or noise. They adapt to surroundings. A stick becomes sufficient entertainment. A shared glance becomes a joke. Laughter is brief and contained. It flares and disappears quickly. Joy here is practiced in short, efficient bursts. Late-night history notices how early children learn the shape of limits. They do not test boundaries aggressively. Testing implies expectation of flexibility. Boundaries here are stable. Children learn them the way they learn the weight of objects. Through use, not explanation. There is no ceremony marking the transition from child to adult. The transition happens through accumulation. One more task, one less question, one more night slept lightly. Childhood fades not because it is taken away, but because it becomes impractical to maintain. Adults do not reminisce about their own childhoods. There is little to contrast. The patterns repeat. What they remember instead are specific moments when silence proved useful, when listening prevented trouble, when not asking preserved energy. These memories are not shared as stories. They are embedded in behavior. Children are rarely told that life will be difficult. That knowledge would add nothing. They experience difficulty in manageable portions. Each day introduces a small amount, enough to build familiarity without overwhelming. The absence of commentary makes it feel normal. Difficulty loses its drama when it is not announced. Education happens through proximity, watching adults repair things, observing how tools are handled, noticing which paths are taken at night, which sounds matter, which do not. This learning is quiet and constant. Mistakes are corrected without explanation. The correction itself is the lesson. There is a dry humor in how quickly children stop expecting fairness. Fairness requires negotiation. Negotiation requires time. Time is scarce. Children learn instead to expect consistency. Consistency can be relied upon. It does not promise comfort, but it avoids surprise. Late-night history lingers on these children because they explain how endurance reproduces itself. Silence is not inherited genetically. It is taught through environment, through repetition, through the absence of alternatives. These children will grow into adults who do not expect recognition, who do not require explanation, who understand that survival rarely announces itself. As night deepens, children sleep lightly. They wake easily, not because they are anxious, but because their bodies have learned availability. This readiness is not exhausting to them. It is familiar. Familiarity reduces effort. When these children grow older and eventually disappear from record, nothing will mark their passing. No name preserved, no age recorded. Yet their influence remains embedded in the rhythm of the place, in how quietly the village continues to function. They learned silence early, not as a loss, but as a tool. And in a place like this, tools matter more than words. Sounds that refuse to explain themselves. Night unease without drama. The hook settles in slowly, the way sound does once light has already surrendered. This is the hour when the village stops trusting its eyes and begins negotiating with its ears. Not urgently, not fearfully, just carefully. Late night history prefers this moment because it strips tension of its theatrics. Nothing leaps, nothing announces itself. The night does not perform danger. It only offers ambiguity, and ambiguity is harder to escape than fear. In the border village, night does not arrive carrying silence. It arrives carrying sound that refuses to clarify itself. A shift in the wind, a scrape against wood, a footstep that might belong to no one in particular. These sounds are not rare, they are expected. The mistake would be reacting to each of them as if it mattered. Experience has taught the villagers that constant alarm is more dangerous than uncertainty. Most sounds in the night are ordinary. Animals move, wood settles, the ground responds to temperature. None of this indicates intent, yet none of it can be ignored completely. The villagers have learned to occupy a narrow space between dismissal and panic. They listen without leaning forward. Awareness is present but relaxed. This balance did not come from training. It came from exhaustion. Early generations likely reacted differently. Alarmed too often, woken too easily. Over time, those reactions proved inefficient. Sleep lost repeatedly weakens the body faster than most threats. The village adjusted, not by becoming braver, but by becoming selective. Attention became a resource to be conserved. There is no formal rule about which sounds matter. Instead, there is a shared instinct shaped by repetition. A sudden silence matters more than noise. A sound that repeats matters more than one that fades. Rhythm carries more weight than volume. These distinctions are never explained. They are absorbed the way posture is absorbed by watching others sit. Late night history notices how unease here lacks narrative. There is no rising tension, no release, just a low-level awareness that hums beneath everything else. This is not anxiety as modern people understand it. It is calibration. The body remains ready without being strained. Muscles are loose. Breath stays even. The night does not demand more than that. Inside the houses, people lie still listening without concentrating. Concentration would sharpen fear. Instead, they allow sound to pass through awareness without stopping. This is a learned skill. Not ignoring, not chasing. Letting noise exist without granting it authority. Children pick this up quickly. They notice which sounds cause adults to shift and which do not. They imitate the stillness. The absence of reaction becomes instructive. Night teaches through example. Sound becomes background rather than message. There is a quiet irony in how untrustworthy sound feels here. Silence is not safety. Noise is not threat. The usual assumptions do not apply. Sound does not explain itself, and no one demands that it try. Interpretation is delayed, often indefinitely. This creates a strange calm, not comfort, calm, the kind that comes from accepting incomplete information. People do not need certainty to continue resting. They need consistency, and the night provides that. Sounds come and go. The pattern remains. Late night history lingers because this challenges the idea that fear requires stimulation. Here, fear has been edited down to something functional. It does not spike. It does not fade. It maintains a steady presence like weather, unpleasant but manageable. When a sound truly matters, it is rarely loud. It is the wrong sound in the wrong place, a pause where movement should be, a repetition that breaks pattern. These are noticed without discussion. Bodies respond quietly. A shift, a hand placed closer to a tool, a breath held slightly longer. Nothing dramatic follows, unless it must. Most nights, nothing must follow. That is the lesson reinforced over years. The absence of consequence teaches restraint better than any warning ever could. The night becomes predictable in its unpredictability. There is also humor here, though it is dry and unspoken. The idea that so much unease could be generated by sounds that amount to nothing, a branch settling, an animal passing through. The villagers do not laugh about it openly, but the patience with which they endure it suggests an awareness that panic would be embarrassing. Late-night history appreciates this understated confidence, not the confidence of control, but the confidence of survival without explanation. The night does not need to make sense. It only needs to pass without extracting too much from those inside it. As hours move forward, the sounds thin out, not because danger has retreated, but because everything has settled into place. The village breathes as one loose system. Nothing is entirely asleep. Nothing is entirely awake. Unease remains present, but it does not grow. It does not demand attention. It is simply there as a reminder that certainty was never promised. This reminder does not disrupt rest. It frames it. By the time the night begins to loosen its grip, the sounds that once felt ambiguous have lost their weight. They fade without explanation. No conclusion is offered. None is needed. This is how the village survives night after night. Not by conquering fear, but by refusing to elevate it. Sound exists, unease exists, neither is given a stage. Late-night history finds comfort in this refusal. Not because it resolves anything, but because it shows how little resolution is required for life to continue. Tension that never climbs. Calm learned from exhaustion. The hook does not tighten, it settles. This is the point where unease stops trying to impress anyone. After hours of listening to sounds that never explain themselves, the village does not escalate. It levels out. Late-night history prefers this stage because it contradicts expectation. We are trained to think tension must peak or resolve. Here it does neither. It lingers at a manageable temperature, like weather that has decided to stay inconvenient, but predictable. Nothing sharpens, nothing breaks. The night continues, not because it is conquered, but because everyone involved is too familiar with it to argue. What follows is not relief. Relief would suggest release. Instead, there is acceptance that feels almost professional. People have been awake long enough to know which reactions waste energy. Panic is inefficient. It burns strength without producing clarity. The body learns this faster than the mind. Muscles remain loose. Breathing stays even. The absence of alarm is not bravery, it is budgeting. This is how tension becomes background rather than event. It is present without demanding response. The villagers have learned to let unease exist without elevating it to authority. That lesson did not come quickly. Early generations likely tried harder, watched more closely, reacted more often. The cost of that vigilance became clear over time. Exhaustion proved more dangerous than most of the threats it was meant to prevent. Late-night history notices how fatigue refines behavior, not into passivity but into selectivity. Attention is applied sparingly. It is saved for moments that truly disrupt pattern. Everything else is allowed to pass through awareness without being held. This restraint looks like calm from the outside. Inside it feels like maintenance. The night offers plenty of opportunities to panic. None of them insist. Sounds come and go. Silence stretches and contracts. Nothing arrives with proof. Proof would simplify things. Instead, there is suggestion, ambiguity, the kind that invites imagination. The villagers do not accept the invitation. Imagination consumes resources better spent on rest. Inside the houses, people remain in a state that is neither sleep nor full waking. It is a loose availability. Bodies respond without commitment. A sound is heard, not pursued. A pause is noted, not interrogated. This is not negligence, it is experience choosing efficiency. Children observe this and absorb it without instruction. They learn that reaction is optional, that stillness can be active, that waiting does not always mean fear. These lessons arrive without words and therefore stick more firmly. Language would only complicate them. There is a quiet irony in how much discipline this requires. From the outside, it appears effortless. From the inside, it is a practiced refusal. Refusal to dramatize, refusal to assign meaning prematurely, refusal to turn the night into a narrative. The night resists narrative anyway. Late-night history appreciates this refusal because it mirrors the way most of the past actually functioned. Large events were rare, small pressures were constant. People survived not by rising to moments, but by flattening them, by smoothing spikes into tolerable lines. Tension here is not a signal, it is a condition, like damp air, like uneven ground. It does not announce danger. It reminds everyone that certainty was never part of the arrangement. This reminder does not disrupt rest. It frames it. The calm that develops is not comforting. It is practical. It does not promise safety. It promises continuity. Tomorrow will arrive because tonight did not extract too much. That is the measure of success. No one congratulates themselves for remaining calm. That would imply choice. Calm emerges because alternatives have been tested and found inefficient. Over time, this becomes habit. Habit becomes culture. Culture becomes invisible. Late-night history lingers because this is where dramatic language fails. There is no climax to describe, no resolution to summarize, just a long stretch of acceptance carried quietly by tired bodies. The night moves forward, not because it is defeated, but because no one feeds it attention. As hours pass, the tension does not disappear. It thins, like fog that does not lift, but spreads out until it is no longer obstructive. People sleep when they can, wake when they must. Nothing about this feels symbolic. It is mechanical and therefore dependable. The idea of winning the night would feel strange here. Victory implies opposition. The night is not an enemy. It is a condition. Conditions are managed, not defeated. The village understands this instinctively. It treats night the way it treats cold or hunger, as something to be navigated without commentary. There is also a dry humor in how anticlimactic this feels. After all the listening, all the waiting, nothing happens. The night passes. The tension never earns a story. The villagers would not be surprised. Expecting otherwise would suggest inexperience. Late night history finds this anticlimax honest. It reflects the reality that most unease never pays off. Most nights do not justify their tension. They simply occupy time until fatigue dulls their edges. By the time the darkness begins to loosen its hold, the village has already adjusted. Nothing shifts dramatically. People do not mark the moment. Light will return eventually. Until then, calm holds. Not because it is chosen, but because it is cheaper than fear. This is how the night moves on. Through acceptance rather than conquest. Through exhaustion rather than courage. Through a calm that learned its shape the hard way. Shelter without ambition. Houses built to outlast attention. The hook arrives with a simple observation that feels almost impolite in its honesty. These houses were never meant to be admired. They were meant to work. Late night history tends to linger around buildings like this because they refuse to perform. No curves reach upward seeking meaning. No surfaces invite interpretation. Everything exists at a height and thickness that suggests one goal only: still being here tomorrow. If architecture could express exhaustion without complaint, this would be its dialect. In the border village, a house is not a statement. It is a decision repeated until it becomes habit. Low walls press close to the ground, as if gravity were a trusted ally rather than something to overcome. Roofs slope gently, not to impress the sky, but to persuade weather to move along. Nothing rises high enough to attract attention. Attention is unpredictable and therefore undesirable. These buildings do not pretend to be permanent. They simply resist disappearance. Materials are chosen for their willingness to endure rather than their ability to impress. Wood that bends rather than snaps. Stone that absorbs pressure without protest. Earth packed tightly enough to discourage intrusion, but loosely enough to be repaired without ceremony. This is not craftsmanship as celebration. It is craftsmanship as maintenance. Rooms are small because small spaces are easier to control. Heat stays longer. Sound behaves predictably. Shadows remain familiar. Large rooms encourage wandering thoughts, and wandering thoughts waste energy. The architecture quietly discourages both. Movement inside the house follows narrow paths, learned through repetition. No one needs to think about where to step. The floor remembers. Windows are cautious. They exist but do not advertise. Openings are sized to admit light without inviting vulnerability. Glass is rare, shutters are common. The house does not want to see the outside world more than necessary. It prefers filtered information. Partial visibility is safer than full exposure. Late night history appreciates how these houses refuse narrative. They do not tell stories about who lives inside them. There is no emphasis on status or identity. From the outside, one house resembles the next, closely enough to discourage distinction. Individuality would require explanation, and explanation invites curiosity. Curiosity travels. Inside the house, objects are arranged with quiet discipline. Nothing sits idle without justification. Furniture does not sprawl. Storage hides what does not need to be seen. Visual calm reduces cognitive effort. The house assists the body by asking very little of it. You do not have to decide where things go. They have always gone there. Comfort exists, but only to the extent that it does not interfere with function. Softness is allowed where rest is unavoidable. Hard surfaces dominate where work occurs. There is no attempt to disguise this logic. A bench is a bench. A bed is a place to lie down and recover just enough. Excess padding would suggest optimism. Optimism suggests risk. The walls themselves seem to understand their role. They block wind, they muffle sound, they absorb temperature slowly, they do not echo. Echoes make small noises feel important. Importance is expensive. The house prefers neutrality. It lets sound arrive and then removes its urgency. These houses do not encourage gathering. They accommodate it when necessary. Space allows people to exist together without collision, not without friction. Friction is accepted. Too much space would create distance. Distance invites isolation. Isolation invites unpredictability. The architecture chooses controlled proximity. Late-night history notices how little these houses change over time. Repairs are made quietly, additions are rare, alteration suggests expectation of future improvement. The house does not expect improvement, it expects continuation. When something fails, it is replaced with something similar. Familiarity reduces error. There is a subtle humor in how unromantic these buildings are. They resist the urge to become symbols. Later generations might look at them and search for meaning. They will be disappointed. The meaning was never hidden. It was always practical. Stay warm, stay dry, stay unnoticed. At night, the house becomes even more itself. Darkness compresses the interior into a smaller functional zone. Firelight reveals only what must be used. Corners fade into irrelevance. The house does not protest this reduction. It was designed for it. The world shrinks, and the house shrinks with it. Doors are heavy enough to feel reassuring, but not so heavy that opening them becomes an event. Hinges are quiet, latches are simple, nothing announces movement loudly. The house cooperates with the idea that sound should remain optional. It does not amplify. It absorbs. Children learn the house by touch, long before they understand it by sight. Hands slide along familiar edges. Feet find thresholds without hesitation. The building teaches memory through repetition. You do not have to see where you are going. You already know. Adults treat the house as a partner rather than a possession. It shelters them, and in return, they maintain it. This relationship contains no sentimentality. Gratitude would imply expectation of kindness. The house is not kind, it is reliable. Reliability earns respect. Late-night history lingers here because these structures contradict the way architecture is often discussed. There is no ambition to impress future observers, no desire to leave a mark. The mark left is absence. Absence of collapse, absence of surprise, absence of complaint. When storms come, the house does not stand heroically. It endures quietly. When cold settles, it does not challenge it. It resists just enough. This measured response prevents exhaustion. Overreaction would cost materials and effort better saved. The house also teaches patience. Repairs are made when conditions allow, not immediately, not ceremonially. Damage is assessed calmly. Panic does not speed rebuilding. The house models this restraint, and the people follow. There is no pride in these buildings. Pride requires comparison. Comparison requires audience. The house has neither. It exists for those inside it and ignores everyone else. This indifference is its greatest strength. By morning, the house will look the same. That is its success. Nothing dramatic happened during the night. The walls held, the roof remained, the interior supported rest. The house did its job and did not ask to be thanked. Late-night history does not elevate these structures into monuments. It allows them to remain what they always were: tools, quiet ones, tools that shaped lives, not by inspiring them, but by allowing them to continue without interruption. In a place like this, architecture is not an art of vision. It is an art of restraint. And restraint here is not a lack. It is the reason anything else survives at all. The interior of enough, living with what refuses to impress. The hook arrives quietly, almost apologetically, as if it does not wish to interrupt the room. Inside these houses, nothing announces itself. There is no reveal, no moment where the eye is guided towards something meant to be admired. Late-night history prefers interiors like this because they tell the truth without raising their voice. This is not poverty staged as virtue. It is selection practiced over time. What remains is what survived use. What disappeared failed the test of repetition. If the room has a style, it is the style of not asking for attention. The interior continues the logic of the shelter that holds it. Space is treated as a resource to be managed rather than filled. Every object must justify its presence by being useful more than once. Decoration that serves only one purpose rarely survives long. It demands explanation and delivers little in return. Over time, such things drift away quietly. What stays are items that can be trusted to perform without comment. Furniture is minimal but not fragile. Benches are sturdy and unadorned. Tables are wide enough to work on and no wider. Chairs exist where sitting is unavoidable. No piece of furniture attempts to become a destination. You do not arrive at a chair. You use it and move on. This reduces decision-making. You do not choose where to sit. The room has already decided. Surfaces remain mostly clear. Not because people are tidy, but because clutter interferes with movement. Movement matters at night. Objects left in the wrong place create noise, and noise creates unnecessary attention. The interior cooperates with the idea that silence is valuable. Everything that stays visible has learned how to be quiet. Tools are stored where hands expect them. Not labeled, not arranged symmetrically, arranged by memory. This memory is physical rather than visual. Hands reach without looking. The body knows where things belong because it has reached there before many times. Rearranging would be inefficient. The room discourages novelty. Light inside the house is limited and intentional. It reveals only what must be used. Shadows remain in place without apology. Corners do not demand inspection. The room understands that full visibility is unnecessary and tiring. Partial knowledge is enough to function. More than enough. Late-night history notices how little effort is spent making the interior pleasant. Pleasantness is unpredictable. It depends on mood. Mood fluctuates. Function is reliable. The room chooses reliability. If something feels uncomfortable, it is tolerated until it interferes with work or rest. Only then is it addressed. Comfort is allowed but not pursued. There is a subtle humor in how practical this feels. Outsiders might describe it as bleak. That would miss the point. Bleakness implies disappointment. Disappointment requires expectation. Expectation has been removed. What remains is a space that does not argue with reality. It accepts it and adjusts accordingly. Objects inside the house rarely belong to a single person. Ownership is diffuse. Items circulate according to need. This reduces attachment and therefore loss. If something breaks, it is inconvenient rather than tragic. Sentimentality would complicate replacement. The interior does not encourage sentimentality. Beds are simple and functional. They exist to allow the body to lie down and recover enough to continue. Softness is limited. Too much softness would invite lingering. Lingering invites delay. Delay costs energy. The bed understands its role and does not exceed it. Storage is hidden when possible. Visual calm reduces mental strain. The room does not want to be interpreted. It wants to be navigated. Shelves hold what must be accessed quickly. Everything else recedes into darkness. Darkness is not feared here. It is useful. Children learn the interior by interacting with it rather than being instructed. They know which objects are tolerated and which cause irritation. They learn to return things to their place without being told. The room teaches through consequence rather than rule. Noise results in attention. Quiet results in being left alone. The lesson is efficient. Late-night history appreciates how this interior resists the temptation to become symbolic. There are no heirlooms displayed prominently, no attempt to preserve the past through objects. Preservation is expensive and offers little return. The past is remembered through habit instead, through how things are done rather than what is kept. When repairs are made, they are visible and unapologetic. Patches remain patches. There is no attempt to disguise them. Disguise would require effort better spent elsewhere. The interior does not mind showing wear. Wear is proof of use. Use is the highest compliment. At night, the interior compresses further. Only a small zone remains active. The rest of the room fades. This shrinking is not loss. It is focus. The interior becomes what is needed and nothing more. Excess space sleeps. There is a calm that comes from knowing nothing here will surprise you. No hidden drawers. No decorative elements that suddenly fall. The room behaves predictably. Predictability is a form of kindness in a place where other conditions are less forgiving. Late-night history lingers because this interior contradicts modern ideas of self-expression. Expression here is indirect. It happens through restraint, through what is absent, rather than what is displayed. The room expresses the values of those who live inside it without announcing them. If someone were to ask what the interior means, the answer would be unsatisfying. It means enough. Enough space to move, enough light to see, enough warmth to endure, nothing more, nothing less. This is not minimalism as philosophy. It is minimalism as consequence. Over time, anything unnecessary removed itself. What remains did so by being useful quietly and repeatedly. By morning, the interior will look unchanged. That is its success. Nothing was rearranged, nothing was improved, nothing demanded attention. The room supported the night and did not interfere. Late-night history does not decorate this interior with interpretation. It allows it to remain what it is, a space shaped by avoidance of trouble rather than pursuit of beauty. If there is a style, it is the style of avoiding inconvenience. And in a place like this, that is more than enough. Time without markers, when nothing asks to be recorded. The hook arrives in the quiet stretch where time stops offering signals. This is the portion of the night when clocks would feel embarrassed if they existed. Nothing announces itself. Nothing completes a cycle worth naming. Late-night history leans into this hour because it exposes a difficult truth. Most time did not feel historic while it was happening. It felt repetitive. It felt vague. It felt like something you endured rather than witnessed. If history had a preference, it would avoid moments like this entirely. And that avoidance explains more than most chronicles ever admit. This is the part of the night where the village does not shift. No door opens that did not open before. No sound arrives that has not already been heard. Bodies remain in positions negotiated earlier. Sleep continues in fragments. Waking happens without urgency. Time moves but refuses to identify itself. Without markers, it becomes slippery. You cannot point to a moment and say, "This was when something happened." Nothing did. People often imagine that history is composed of events. That time advances by stepping stones of consequence. But in places like this, time behaves differently. It stretches rather than jumps. It smooths rather than punctuates. Hours do not compete for attention. They cooperate in being forgettable. This is not failure. It is function. The village does not attempt to measure this stretch. Measuring would require comparison. Comparison would require a reference point. There is none. The night before felt similar. The night after will too. Recording this one would add nothing useful. Memory selects what disrupts routine. Routine itself dissolves into background. Late night history notices how comfortable people become with this. Not comfortable in the sense of pleasure, comfortable in the sense of acceptance. The absence of change is not frustrating. It is expected. Expectation reduces effort. When nothing is anticipated, nothing can disappoint. Inside the houses, bodies continue the work of resting without ceremony. There is no deep sleep to celebrate. There is no long wakefulness to complain about. People drift, awareness fades and returns without significance. The night does not ask for commitment. It simply continues. Time here does not feel slow. It feels thick, like air that resists movement without stopping it. Trying to track it would be exhausting, so people stop trying. This is not ignorance. It is efficiency. Attention is better spent elsewhere. Children experience this stretch differently at first. They notice the sameness. They feel the absence of signal. Over time, they learn that nothing is wrong. The night is not broken. It is behaving as expected. Their sense of time adjusts. Waiting becomes normal. Boredom loses its edge. Patience becomes unremarkable. There is a quiet irony in how historians later describe periods of stability. They compress years into sentences. They treat the absence of drama as a gap rather than a condition. But for those living inside it, this gap was everything. It was the substance of life, the space where habits formed, where endurance accumulated unnoticed. Late night history lingers here because this is where meaning thins out, not disappears, thins. Meaning does not vanish entirely. It becomes diffuse, spread across repetition, harder to isolate, easier to live with. No one in the village is thinking about legacy during this hour. Legacy requires foresight. Foresight requires distance from necessity. Necessity is close and constant here. Thinking beyond the next task offers no advantage, so thoughts stay near. The night continues without offering feedback. It does not reward calm. It does not punish inattention. It simply persists. This neutrality is oddly reassuring. It suggests that survival does not always require vigilance. Sometimes it requires endurance without commentary, Late night history recognizes that this kind of time is difficult to narrate. It resists verbs. Nothing begins, nothing ends, nothing escalates. Language prefers movement. This hour offers none. It offers continuation. And continuation is hard to celebrate. Yet this unmarked time performs essential work. It allows bodies to recover partially. It allows tension to settle into background. It allows systems to remain intact by not being stressed. If every hour demanded attention, nothing would survive long enough to matter. The absence of record is not accidental. It is logical. Writing something down would require deciding that this moment differed from others. It did not. And so it joins countless identical hours that supported everything else without ever being acknowledged. Late night history finds a quiet humor in this neglect. The nights that mattered most to continuity were the ones no one bothered to name. They were too busy being useful. Drama steals credit that maintenance deserves. As time drifts forward, it does so without sound. No internal signal announces progress. The body measures it indirectly through fatigue and hunger and stiffness. These cues are enough. Clocks would add little. Eventually this stretch will give way to something slightly different. A hint of light, a change in temperature. But even that transition will not feel dramatic. It will feel like the next logical step in a process that never stopped. Until then, the night remains unmarked, unrecorded, uncelebrated. And precisely because of that, it accomplishes its task. It holds the village in place, it preserves routine, it asks nothing and takes little. Late night history does not try to elevate this hour into significance. It lets it remain what it always was, time passing without insisting on memory, time doing its work quietly, time proving that most of history happened when nothing happened at all. The evenness of breathing, a night that exists and withdraws. The hook does not announce itself. It settles into place the way breathing does when no one is counting. After time has stopped offering markers and the night has refused to be recorded, the village enters a deeper stretch. Not deeper in meaning, deeper in consistency. This is the hour when nothing tries to become important. Late night history stays here because it understands something uncomfortable. Most nights did not carry messages. They did not arrive to teach or warn or transform. They existed and then they left. That was enough. And it had to be. At this point, the night no longer feels like an event. It feels like a condition that is stabilized. Sounds continue at a low level. Bodies remain still or shift slightly. Breath repeats itself without effort. The village does not lean forward expecting change. Expectation would introduce tension, and tension would demand resolution. This hour avoids both by refusing to promise anything. People inside the houses are not waiting for meaning. That habit has been trained out of them gently over time. Meaning is unreliable. It arrives rarely and often leaves confusion behind. The night offers something more dependable: continuity. One moment following another without commentary. The mind relaxes when it stops asking the night to explain itself. Late night history notices how this evenness affects the body. Muscles soften, not into vulnerability, but into efficiency. The effort of holding readiness eases into a posture that can be sustained for hours. Breathing becomes slower, not because anyone intends it, but because there is no reason to rush. The night does not respond faster if you breathe harder. This is the stretch where fear loses its narrative. Earlier unease has already been absorbed into background awareness. Now even that awareness becomes less sharp, not because danger has vanished, but because danger never required this level of attention. Most threats do not announce themselves during these hours. Most nights pass without justification. The village has learned this through repetition, not through reassurance. There are no stories told about nights like this because stories require distinction. This night does not distinguish itself. It blends. That blending is its function. Inside the houses, people lie in a state that is neither alert nor asleep. Thoughts drift without direction. Memory loosens its grip. There is no urge to organize experience into sequence. Sequence matters during the day. At night, it dissolves. Time becomes circular. Breath in and breath out. Nothing more is required. Children experience this evenness as normal because it is all they have known. Adults experience it as relief, not because it is pleasant, but because it is predictable. Predictability allows the mind to disengage. Disengagement conserves energy. Energy will be needed again. Late night history lingers because this is where modern expectations collapse. We are taught to believe every moment should offer insight or progress. This hour offers neither. It offers maintenance. It keeps systems running quietly by not demanding attention. The night does not move toward a lesson. It does not sharpen into a revelation. It simply continues until it no longer needs to. This refusal to escalate feels almost deliberate, as if the night understands that intensity would break something fragile. People here do not interpret this as emptiness. Emptiness would imply lack. This feels complete in its own narrow way. Nothing is missing because nothing was requested. The night met all expectations by refusing to create any. Late night history appreciates how this challenges the way history itself is written. Records favor disruption. They compress long stretches of sameness into brief transitions. But those stretches were where endurance was practiced, where habits formed, where survival became automatic rather than heroic. The village does not assign value to this hour. Value would require comparison. Comparison would require another kind of night to contrast against. Those nights exist, but they are rare. Most nights are like this: smooth, even, difficult to describe. Breathing continues without effort. This repetition becomes the dominant rhythm. Not heartbeat, not thought, breath. The simplest motion that confirms life without commentary. The night aligns itself to this rhythm and stays there. Late night history finds a quiet humor in how anticlimactic this is. After hours of waiting and listening and managing unease, nothing arrives. The night does not reward attention, it ignores it. Those who stop asking are allowed to rest. Meaning seekers would find this hour frustrating. Nothing answers back. Nothing responds. The night remains uninterested. The village has learned not to take this personally. Indifference is easier to manage than disappointment. As time moves forward, it does so invisibly. There is no sense of nearing an end. The night does not hint at departure. It simply continues being itself. This lack of transition removes urgency. Urgency would imply a decision needs to be made. No decisions are required now. Late night history stays because this hour explains why most lives did not feel historic while they were being lived. They felt repetitive. They felt quiet. They felt unremarkable. And yet they carried everything forward. Eventually the night will withdraw. Not suddenly, not with gratitude. It will loosen its hold the same way it established it, gradually, without announcement. The evenness will thin, breathing will change pace, light will return enough to be useful again. When that happens, no one will mark the end of this stretch. There will be no reflection, no summary. The night did not offer a message, so none will be extracted. It existed. It withdrew. The village remains. Late night history does not try to elevate this hour into symbolism. It allows it to stay what it was, a long, quiet agreement between time and endurance. No lesson delivered, no meaning assigned. Just the steady proof that continuity does not require explanation. This is the kind of night that made everything else possible. And because of that, it never asked to be remembered. Before morning decides anything, fatigue without urgency. The hook arrives at the hour when the night feels thin but refuses to leave. This is not dawn. It is the negotiation before it, the part where darkness loosens its grip without admitting defeat. Late night history prefers this moment because it exposes a quiet truth. Most nights did not end with relief. They ended with tired bodies discovering how much tiredness they could carry without collapsing. Nothing announces this discovery. It settles in slowly like weight. You only notice once you stop moving. At this stage, sleep has become fragmented enough to feel intentional. People do not expect rest to arrive cleanly. They accept it in short, uneven pieces. A pause, a drift, a return to awareness that feels less like waking and more like adjusting posture. The body does not interpret this as failure. It recognizes the pattern. This is how nights work here. Not broken, just incomplete. Waking during these hours does not feel alarming. It feels procedural, eyes open without urgency. Breathing resumes a conscious rhythm for a moment and then relaxes again. No one checks for danger. That would imply danger had been expected. Instead, people lie still and allow fatigue to speak. Fatigue is honest. It does not exaggerate. It simply reports limits. The night reveals those limits gently. Muscles that worked all day now resist stillness. Joints announce themselves quietly. The body does not complain loudly. It informs. This information is accepted without debate. Pushing past it would not produce better rest. It would only create stiffness for the morning that is already approaching. Late night history notices how different this fatigue is from fear. Fear sharpens. Fatigue rounds edges. It dulls reaction time in a way that feels almost protective. The mind loses interest in interpretation. Sounds that earlier might have demanded attention now pass through awareness without stopping. The body has decided it will not spend energy on speculation. This is not resignation, it is calibration. Over generations, people here learned that exhaustion can be managed if it is acknowledged early. Ignoring it invites collapse. Respecting it allows continuation. The night becomes a place where limits are quietly negotiated rather than challenged. Sleep during this hour feels shallow but useful, not restorative in the ideal sense. Restorative enough. Enough to reduce strain without erasing it. Enough to carry the body forward. The village does not expect miracles from rest. It expects functionality. Waking repeatedly does not produce frustration. Frustration would require comparison to an imagined better night. No one here imagines that. Nights are nights. They do what they do. Measuring them against ideals would add disappointment without improving outcome. There is a subtle humor in how predictable this becomes. The body wakes, notices fatigue, adjusts, returns to rest. The cycle repeats. If someone were observing from outside, it might appear inefficient. In practice, it is refined. Each waking becomes shorter, each return to rest quicker. The body learns how little attention is required. Late night history lingers because this hour reveals endurance in its most uncelebrated form, not dramatic survival, not heroic vigilance, just the ability to remain functional while tired. This skill shaped more lives than any single event ever did. Children experience this accumulated fatigue differently. They wake and resettle with fewer thoughts attached. The body leads. Adults carry more awareness of tomorrow. That awareness adds weight but not panic. Tomorrow will require movement. That is acknowledged and then set aside. The night does not solve tomorrow. It prepares the body just enough. The village itself feels heavier during these hours, not oppressive, dense, as if everything has agreed to move less. Fires burn lower, sounds soften further. Even the air seems reluctant to travel quickly. This shared slowing creates a sense of permission. Permission to stop trying to improve the night and simply let it pass. Late night history finds a quiet irony here. This is the hour closest to morning, yet the least hopeful. Not because hope is absent, but because hope is unnecessary. Morning will arrive whether anyone hopes for it or not. Attaching emotion to that arrival would not change its timing. The body recognizes this before the mind does. It stops scanning, stops listening deeply. The threshold of concern rises. Only significant disruption would penetrate now. Minor discomforts are tolerated. This tolerance is not numbness, it is prioritization. There is no ceremony marking this phase. No one acknowledges that fatigue has peaked. It does not need acknowledgement. It announces itself through heaviness and slowness. These signals are clear enough. Late night history appreciates how unspectacular this is. The limits of endurance are revealed without drama. No collapse occurs, no breakthrough follows. The night simply exposes what the body can handle, and then continues. As the darkness thins further, the body remains in this negotiated state. Not asleep, not alert, available, ready to move when required, but unwilling to move early. This reluctance is not laziness. It is conservation. The village has learned to trust this rhythm. Fatigue crests and then levels. It does not worsen indefinitely. It reaches a point where nothing new is added. That plateau is manageable. People rest there until the environment changes enough to justify adjustment. Late night history stays because this hour explains why so many lives left no record. Nothing happened worth writing down. And yet, everything important was happening quietly. Bodies learning their limits, minds learning when to stop asking questions. Communities learning how to pass time without breaking under it. When morning finally arrives, it will not feel earned. It will feel inevitable. The fatigue of this hour will not disappear instantly. It will be carried into the day and distributed across tasks. That distribution makes it tolerable. This is not an ending, it is a hinge. The night has shown its hand. The body has read it. No conclusions are drawn. No lessons extracted. The village continues because it always did. Late night history does not dramatize this moment. It lets it remain what it was. A quiet exposure of endurance. A reminder that survival often depends not on strength, but on knowing when strength is unnecessary. The night has not finished yet, but it no longer demands attention. Fatigue has taken over that role, and fatigue is easier to manage than fear. Morning without ceremony, when night simply stops. The hook arrives without brightness and without promise. This is not the moment people imagine when they think of morning. There is no sense of arrival, no relief worth naming. Late night history lingers here because this is where expectation finally gives up. After fatigue has settled into the body and urgency has drained away, the night does not end. It loosens. It thins. It stops, insisting on itself. Morning does not replace it so much as the night withdraws quietly after deciding it has taken enough space. Light begins to appear in a way that feels almost accidental, not a reveal, not an announcement, just a subtle shift that makes certain shapes easier to recognize. The village does not respond. No one sits up to acknowledge the change. Bodies remain where they are. Fatigue does not lift simply because visibility improves. The body does not mistake light for permission. This is not dawn as celebration, it is dawn as technical adjustment. Darkness becomes less useful and so it fades. That is all. There is no sense of transition. Nothing crosses a line, nothing completes a cycle. The night simply loses relevance and steps aside. Late night history prefers this because it contradicts narrative instinct. Stories want thresholds. They want moments where something becomes something else. This hour offers none. The night does not resolve. The morning does not begin. There is only a narrowing of darkness until it no longer matters. People inside the houses experience this as continuation rather than change. The same heaviness remains in the body, the same dull awareness, the same agreement to move slowly. If anything, the arrival of light feels premature. Fatigue had not finished its work. But the environment does not wait for bodies to catch up. It changes when it changes. No one welcomes the light. Welcoming would imply gratitude. Gratitude would imply relief. There is none strong enough to justify the effort. The light does not fix anything. It merely reveals what already exists. The stiffness, the unfinished rest, the quiet obligation of another day. Late night history notices how the absence of ceremony preserves energy. If people treated morning as an event, they would spend themselves emotionally before the day even began. Here, that mistake is avoided through habit. Morning is acknowledged indirectly, through movement rather than emotion. Eyes open more frequently now, not sharply, not eagerly, just more often. The body tests readiness. It does not commit. This testing happens without thought. Muscles shift, breath adjusts. The body decides when it can afford to rise. Light does not get a vote. The village outside remains still. No sudden sounds mark the transition. Birds do not announce significance. They resume patterns that were paused. The world does not reset, it resumes. This distinction matters. Reset would imply forgiveness. Resume implies continuity. Late night history lingers because this is where endings refuse to perform. The night does not bow. It does not apologize. It does not explain itself. It simply stops being relevant. That is how most things end when no one is watching. People begin to sit up when stiffness becomes more inconvenient than fatigue. This decision is practical rather than symbolic. The body weighs discomforts and chooses the lesser one. Movement begins not because it is desired, but because remaining still costs more now. There is no collective moment, no shared acknowledgement that the night is over. Everyone moves according to their own calculation. This lack of synchronization prevents drama. Drama requires coordination. Coordination requires intention. There is none. Late-night history finds a quiet irony here. This is the moment closest to renewal, yet it feels neutral, not hopeful, not bleak, just necessary. The body does not ask the day to be better than the last. It asks only that it be manageable. Light spreads gradually, corners lose their authority, shadows retreat without resistance. The house becomes legible again. Objects reappear without ceremony. Nothing feels new. Everything feels resumed. Children stir and resettle and stir again. Adults remain slow. The difference is not emotional. It is physical. Bodies with longer histories carry fatigue differently. The light does not erase that difference. It highlights it gently. Late-night history appreciates how this moment resists interpretation. There is no lesson here. No insight arrives with the light. The night did not prepare a message. It prepared bodies enough to continue. People do not reflect on the night that passed. Reflection would imply the night mattered enough to examine. It did not. It did what nights do. It existed. It withdrew. Attention is redirected toward immediate tasks. The absence of ceremony also prevents disappointment. If no one expects a moment, nothing can fail to arrive. This expectation management is subtle and effective. Over time, it becomes instinct. Mourning here is not greeted. It is accepted. Acceptance requires less energy than enthusiasm. Energy is needed elsewhere. The village has learned this without being taught. Late-night history stays because this moment explains why so many lives felt continuous rather than episodic. There were no clean breaks, no clear chapters, just long stretches of sameness, interrupted occasionally by necessity. This moment is one of those stretches. As the light stabilizes, the last traces of night become irrelevant, not gone. Irrelevant, fatigue remains. Unease dissolves into habit. The day begins not with clarity, but with tolerance. People step outside when required, not before. The air feels slightly different, cooler or warmer. It does not matter enough to comment on. The environment has shifted just enough to demand response. The night is over in the same way it existed, quietly, without explanation, without apology. It did not end because something defeated it. It ended because time moved on. Late-night history does not dramatize this. It lets the moment remain what it was, an unmarked withdrawal, a non-event that made continuation possible. This is how most nights ended. Not with conclusions, but with disappearance. They did not leave stories behind. They left bodies standing. That was their contribution. The village continues because nothing prevented it from doing so. And that is the only ending it ever needed. The day that pretended nothing happened. Routine after night. The hook arrives without curiosity and without concern. This is the hour when the village resumes itself as if the night were a minor inconvenience that does not deserve discussion. No one checks for evidence. No one compares notes. Late-night history favors this moment because it refuses the instinct to review. The day does not ask what the night meant. It asks what needs to be done. And that question has an answer that does not change much. The fields remain. The tools remain. The bodies remain. The night has withdrawn without leaving instructions. That absence becomes permission to continue. Morning settles into place not as a new chapter, but as a continuation that has changed clothes. Light is now useful enough to justify movement. That is the only difference worth noting. People step outside when it becomes efficient to do so. Not earlier, not ceremonially. The village does not stretch or greet the day. Stretching would imply preparation. Preparation would imply novelty. There is none. Work resumes with the same quiet economy it always had. Tools are lifted and set down, hands find familiar grips, paths accept footsteps they have memorized. Nothing requires explanation. Nothing requests interpretation. The night does not come up in conversation because conversation is reserved for matters that alter outcomes. The night did not. Late night history notices how effective forgetting can be. Not forgetting in the sense of loss, forgetting as filtration. The village discards information that offers no advantage. Sounds that did not become events are not archived. Waking that did not prevent rest is not reviewed. Unease that did not escalate is not analyzed. The mind moves on because moving on saves energy. The rhythm of the day absorbs what remains of fatigue. It spreads it across tasks until it becomes tolerable. Stiffness is addressed by movement. Hunger is addressed by routine pauses. No one announces these adjustments. They are not noteworthy. The body solves small problems without consulting the past. Children step back into the same patterns with ease. Whatever the night offered them has already been folded into habit. There is no retelling, no processing. They carry forward what matters and leave the rest behind. Adults do the same with more weight and less speed. The result is similar. The village does not mark survival. That would imply risk. Risk implies the possibility of failure. Failure would require attention. The day has enough demands already. Marking survival would be inefficient. Survival is assumed until proven otherwise. Late night history lingers because this indifference is revealing. The night felt long while it lasted. It contained tension and fatigue and waiting. None of that qualifies it for remembrance. Memory prefers disruption. Continuity does not compete well. Work organizes the morning into manageable units, not hours but actions. Carry this, fix that, move there. The sequence matters more than the time. The village has learned that time behaves better when it is broken into tasks rather than measured. There is a quiet humor in how seriously the day takes itself after such a long night. Not solemn, serious in the sense of focused. The day has no interest in how the night felt. It asks only what remains undone. The answer is usually the same as yesterday. Late night history appreciates how this return to routine erases drama. The night does not cast a shadow over the morning. It does not earn a footnote. It simply steps aside. The village continues because continuation is its default state. No one tells the story of the night because there is no audience for it. An audience would require curiosity. Curiosity would slow things down. The day prefers speed measured by efficiency rather than urgency. Efficiency does not ask questions. The fields receive attention without commentary. They do not care whether people slept well. They require work regardless. This clarity simplifies behavior. People respond to what is in front of them. The past is not in front of them. It is behind and unhelpful. Late night history notes how quickly the night loses authority once light stabilizes. Even memories that felt heavy an hour ago lose weight. Not because they were resolved, but because they were replaced by immediate necessity. Necessity edits memory ruthlessly. The village looks unchanged. Houses stand as they did. Paths remain worn. Nothing bears the mark of having endured a night. That invisibility is intentional. If endurance left visible marks, the village would be overwhelmed by its own history. People exchange brief words when needed. Instructions, clarifications. Nothing reflective. Reflection would require stillness. Stillness belongs to night. The day has other priorities. There is no sense of achievement attached to having reached morning. Achievement implies effort beyond expectation. Morning arrives regardless. Attaching pride to its arrival would be misplaced. The village understands this intuitively. Late night history stays because this moment completes the cycle without closing it. The night did not demand recognition, and the day does not offer it. This mutual indifference keeps the system stable. As the morning progresses, the last traces of night fatigue disperse into background sensation. Not gone, distributed. The body learns to carry it while working. That skill has been practiced for years. The absence of storytelling also prevents fear from gaining leverage. If no one tells the night it was frightening, then fear has no place to settle. It fades quietly, like a sound that was never repeated. Late night history finds a final irony here. The night that required the most patience leaves the least evidence. The day that follows pretends nothing happened. This pretense is not denial, it is selection. The village keeps what is useful and releases the rest. By midday, the night has become irrelevant. Not forgotten, irrelevant. The distinction matters. Forgotten things can return unexpectedly. Irrelevant things rarely do. This is how the night truly ends. Not with light, not with relief, with routine, with hands returning to work, with no story being told because the story would not improve anything. Late night history allows this ending to remain uncelebrated. It does not frame it as triumph or recovery. It frames it as function. The village returns to itself. The night withdraws without leaving a trace, and the day proceeds as if that were always the plan. A night that asked for nothing. History without a footnote. The hook arrives after the day has already decided to move on. This is the moment when even routine stops paying attention to what came before. The night has dissolved so completely that it no longer qualifies as a subject. Late night history settles here because this is where expectation finally collapses. Not into insight, not into closure, into indifference. The village does not thank the night for passing. It does not accuse it of anything either. The night did not interrupt. It did not demand. It did not leave evidence. And that restraint turns out to be its defining feature. Most history did not happen where attention was focused. It happened where attention was unnecessary. It unfolded in places that did not require explanation to continue functioning. Nights like this one did not announce transitions. They did not create heroes or victims. They simply occupied time until time moved on. The absence of record is not a failure of memory. It is proof that nothing broke badly enough to deserve commentary. Late night history prefers this ending because it resists the instinct to summarize. Summaries imply lessons. Lessons imply intention. This night had none. It did not arrive to teach. It did not depart to warn. It passed through the village the way weather often does when it decides not to escalate. Quietly, without consequences worth measuring. The village carries on with a kind of practiced forgetfulness, not ignorance, selective erasure. What is remembered are things that alter behavior. This night altered nothing. It left routines intact. It left structures standing. It left bodies tired but functional. There is nothing to extract from that outcome. Extraction would imply hidden meaning. There was none. Histories often privilege moments of disruption because disruption leaves marks, burned layers, broken walls, changed borders. But those moments are supported by countless unmarked nights that did their work invisibly. They allowed people to rest just enough. They allowed tension to flatten rather than spike. They prevented collapse through repetition rather than intervention. Late night history lingers because this reveals an uncomfortable truth. Most stability is boring, and boring rarely survives documentation. The nights that mattered most to continuity were the ones no one thought to write about. They did not compete for attention. They did not generate quotes. They did not require interpretation. There is a quiet humor in how little this night accomplished while still being essential. It did not improve anything. It did not worsen anything either. It simply did not interfere. If it has value, then that value lies in its refusal to be disruptive. In a world where attention is expensive, non-interference is a form of generosity. People do not speak of the night because speaking would give it weight it never asked for. The day that followed absorbed whatever remained and redistributed it into labor. Fatigue became motion. Unease became habit. Nothing lingered long enough to justify reflection. Late night history understands that endings like this are difficult to accept. We prefer conclusions that resolve tension. We prefer meaning that arrives neatly packaged. But most nights did not deliver those satisfactions. They ended by becoming irrelevant. And that irrelevance allowed everything else to proceed. There is no final image to linger on, no symbolic gesture, no closing sound. The village does not pause to acknowledge how smoothly the night exited. Smooth exits rarely receive applause. Attention gravitates toward chaos. This night offered none. The absence of lesson is deliberate. Lessons imply that something could have gone differently. Nothing about this night suggests that it behaved as expected. It passed without incident. That predictability is not trivial. It is the foundation upon which every unexpected event later depended. Late night history does not attempt to elevate this into philosophy. Philosophy would impose structure where none is needed. This is simply an observation about how most of the past functioned. Quietly, repetitively, without narrative ambition. The night did not shape the future in any dramatic sense. It allowed the future to arrive intact. That is enough. Progress does not require constant upheaval. It often depends on long stretches of nothing going wrong. There is a certain relief in acknowledging this. It removes pressure from the past to perform. Not every moment needs to justify itself retroactively. Some moments existed to be endured and then released. Late night history finds calm here because this ending refuses to compete with others. It does not attempt to outshine collapse or revolution or discovery. It accepts its place beneath those events, supporting them without comment. If someone were to ask what this night meant, the most accurate answer would be very little. And that would not be an insult. It would be a recognition of scale. Most nights were small, and small things held everything together. The village continues because nothing interrupted it. The structures remain because they were not tested beyond capacity. The people move forward because they were not exhausted beyond recovery. This night contributed by knowing its limits. There is no call to remember it, no reason to return. Late night history does not archive it as a curiosity. It lets it fade into the background where it always belonged. The final irony is that nights like this created the conditions for history to be recorded at all. Without them, there would be nothing left to describe, and yet they remain unnamed. This is not a conclusion. It is a release. The night is gone. The day has moved on. No lesson has been delivered. No summary has been issued. If this night has any legacy, it is this: it did not make trouble, and sometimes that is the most important contribution a moment can make. Good night.